Andrew from Regina will be talking about the use of take-home lab kits for teaching online general chemistry labs at the University of Regina. Andrew?
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Before I start, I'm going to apologize a little bit. I'm having some work done in my house, and I thought they would be done by now. So there might be some drilling and hammering, but hopefully it'll be okay. So what I'm going to do is just give a quick overview of how we put together take-home lab kits as part of remote online delivery of general chemistry labs during the last year during the pandemic. So the work that I'm going to talk about was done in collaboration with Erika Smith and Dr. Vince School as well, who are chemistry lab instructors at the U of R. So next, okay. So for general chemistry, during the last year or so, we switched to remote delivery of the lab, so online. So what we ended up was a combination of dry labs and wet labs. So for the dry lab, students would collect data by following videos of pre-recorded experiments or using online simulators. And then for the wet lab, students would perform the experiment themselves at home using a provided lab kit. And so what I'm going to do is just focus on the wet labs that we had the students do using the lab kits. So this is an example of one of the lab kits that we put together. It contains sort of basic lab equipment. So there's beakers, grad cylinders. We also give them thermometer, balance, as well as some household chemicals. So sodium bicarbonate and calcium carbonate in this case. We had Gen Chem 1 and Gen Chem 2. So Gen Chem 1 had a kit, and then as well Gen Chem 2 also had a lab kit as well. For Gen Chem 2, they were given a few more chemicals as well as some pH test strips. The kits, the items cost about $50 to put together, and then the kits were provided to students at no extra cost. And to get the kits to the students, it depended on where the students were located. So for students who were within the local Regina area, they were asked to come onto campus to pick them up from our science stores. For students who are outside of Regina but within Canada, the kits were shipped to them for free, but they were asked to pay to have them shipped back to us once they were done. And then for students who are outside of Canada, once we confirmed that they were outside of Canada, they were provided with an alternate assignment. So they weren't sent the lab kits, but we gave them an alternate assignments to complete. And just to give some numbers for the winter 2021 term, we had a total of 400 lab kits that were distributed between Gen Chem 1, Gen Chem 2, and about 100 kits were shipped to the students. And then we had about 15 students who were outside of Canada, so they had alternate assignments. So these were the labs that we had the students perform at home using their lab kits. So fairly basic introductory Gen Chem labs. So they had a lab on accuracy and precision. So they had to use their equipment to measure out different volumes of water, record the mass, and figure out which piece of equipment was more accurate. You have the ubiquitous coffee cup calorimetry lab. So they had to measure the temperature change from dissolving sodium bicarbonate in water. And then they did a neutralization reaction between calcium carbonate and vinegar. For Gen Chem 2, they had a little bit more sophisticated experiments, I would classify them as. So they had to prepare solutions of the salts that they were provided in the kits and then measure the pH using the pH test strips. And based on the relative acidity, basicity of the solutions, they identified what salts they were given. And then they also did a solubility lab. So they prepared saturated solutions of baking soda at 2 different temperatures, and they determined the solubility by titrating it with vinegar. And the endpoint was indicated by when they no longer saw any carbon dioxide gas being produced. So that's how they knew to stop adding the vinegar. In general, just from student evaluations, the feedback was mostly positive. So obviously students would have preferred to be in person in the lab, but they also enjoyed, or given that they enjoyed, or given the restrictions in place, they enjoyed doing some of the labs at home. The dry labs were kind of hit or miss. Most of the negative feedback was on sort of the kits themselves. So if they were missing equipment or something didn't work or they were missing chemicals, they kind of wrote that on their evaluations. One comment that sort of stood out for me was one student just kind of mentioned, well, what's the point of having to do these labs at home? We're going to have to relearn all of the stuff again anyways once we come back to in person. So ideally, obviously they're going to have to learn how to do an experiment in a lab environment, but what we wanted to do with these kits were to teach them fundamental lab skills that they would need regardless of the lab that they were in. Some of the challenges in terms of coming up with these lab kits and the experiments. Number one, just designing what labs the students could do at home with minimal supervision, with household chemicals. It's very limited. You're very limited with what you can do with baking soda. The second part was just making sure that students were doing the labs and they were doing them correctly. So we would provide them with detailed instructions. So one of the things that we asked the students to do was to take a picture of their experiment as they were performing it and submit it as part of the assignment submission process. So this is an example of one of the submissions that we had that stood out, and it kind of shows some of the students were having fun and enjoying doing the labs at home. We also, for some of the quantitative labs, we did take a look at the results that the students were getting. For the most part, students were getting the expected results that they should have gotten, but there were kind of edge cases where maybe they didn't really pay that much attention to performing the experiment, or they didn't perform the experiment correctly. And then as well, just dealing with general troubleshooting issues. So we had emails about, my balance isn't working, or I'm missing a chemical. One of the most common things we had was I poked a hole through my styrofoam cup. I can't do the calorimeter, and my solution is leaking out. So just kind of dealing with issues with the lab kits themselves. And then I guess the other prong of the challenge that we faced was the logistics of assembling the kits and distributing the kits. So we had to assemble about 400 kits. Once they were returned, we had to restock all of the materials as well as storage. So they did take up quite a bit of space. The other part was identifying students where we had to mail the kits out, whether or not they had the correct mailing address, and then also giving enough lead time so that the kits would arrive on time for them to perform the labs. So our department admin assistant, Marg, handled this part very, very well. So she took on this part and she did an amazing job. And then at the end, getting the kits returned. So from the winter 2021 term, about 10% of the kits weren't returned from Gen Chem 1, about 8% from Gen Chem 2. This was from a couple of weeks ago. Most of the kits that were still outstanding were shipped out to students. So it just, the numbers might be a little bit less from a couple of weeks ago when I checked. So in terms of the future plans, so at the U of R in September, we're still having remote labs for the Gen Chem 1. So we're going to use the kits for another term. Once it's done, we probably don't need them anymore. So a couple of ideas is to possibly donate some of the kit materials to local high schools. We might also introduce a remote lab section for students who are living in remote regions where they can't actually physically be in a lab, so they can actually take a chemistry course. And then also some of the materials that we've developed when for the online lab delivery. So for example, background lab materials, background lab videos, using electronic assignment submissions, we would probably continue forward with that, with those aspects when the labs do come back to face-to-face. And then just at the end, just an acknowledgement. So Marg is our department admin assistant. So she helped a lot in terms of ordering supplies, printing labels, getting everything shipped out. Everybody who helped with assembly of the lab kits. So other lab instructors, faculty members, staff, our grad students, and then Melanie, Allison, and Joe, who work at the science stores for helping with distributing the kits to the students. And then that's all I wanted to talk to you for today. Thank you very much.